Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again Curtis Ellis. He's here to give us an update on what I think is an egregious treaty that President Obama is trying to sneak past the American people, and that's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP for short. Curtis initially alerted our listeners to this quite a few months ago, but since then we'd like to get an update from him. Curtis was a writer and producer for Lou Dobbs Tonight and is currently the executive director of the American Jobs Alliance. He has had over 40 years of experience in national media as a writer, producer, reporter, talk show host, and public relations specialist, and served as communications director and on-the-record spokesperson on campaigns for the city, state, and federal elected officials. So his commentary has appeared all over the major media, places like CNN, MSNBC, NPR, etc. So we're really pleased to have Curtis with us again. Thank you, Curtis, for joining me.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Jay.
Really good to have you because you first alerted me to this at the New York City Junto meetings many months ago, quite a few months ago anyway, and I wasn't aware of the TPP. I mean, occasionally you see it mentioned in the press, but for the most part it's something that the American people aren't aware of at all. So for the benefits of listeners to this show who may not be familiar with it, can you just give us an outline? What is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP for short? What is it intended to do? And well, just give us an outline of what it is.
Sure. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a so-called free trade agreement. It essentially sets the groundwork for merging the economies of 12 nations around the Pacific Rim: the United States, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, the Islamic Sultanate of Brunei, Australia. I may have missed a couple there, but Vietnam is a big one, a big important part of this agreement. It's like NAFTA, like the North American Free Trade Agreement. It sets certain ground rules for economic partnership and economic interaction. Very little of this agreement has to do with things like tariffs and quotas. Most of this agreement has to do with binding rules on investment, copyright, internet censorship, things like that. So it would it's the first step in a European Union-style economic arrangement that would basically place all these countries under similar economic rules that our Congress would not be able to change, and likewise the elected governments in all these other countries would not be able to alter these rules.
Mm-hmm. So in effect, it takes away or removes a certain amount of our national sovereignty, or the national sovereignty of all these nations.
And that is a feature, not a bug. You're exactly right, Jay. That is exactly what it's designed to do. Back in 1967, there's a fellow named George Ball. He was an Undersecretary of State in the Johnson and Kennedy administrations, worked on Wall Street. He appeared in 1967 before a Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress with David Rockefeller. And George Ball stated unequivocally on the record, you'll see it there in the congressional record, nation states are obsolete. We must now move towards a global governance system that allows multinational corporations to act as they wish anywhere in the world without interference from these obsolete entities called nation states. And every single so-called trade agreement that has been pursued ever since then has been to implement this master plan. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the latest installment in that ongoing saga.
Yeah, so the earlier ones were NAFTA, and then there's something going on now with Europe as well, right?
That's right. The Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement, they give it a fancy name, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. I think they've learned, just as they try to keep these things under wraps and away from the public eye, they try to keep the words free trade agreement out of the nomenclature, because that sets off some alarm bells in people's minds. So they call this the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which again would bring the United States and the European Union together into a giant union, economic union. And interestingly enough, they just held elections in Europe over the past weekend for the European Parliament, and there was a huge uprising against this free trade agreement. The winning parties, UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, and the National Front in France, and there are a couple of other parties in Greece and Hungary, that won overwhelmingly, just in this shockingly took huge amounts of votes. They are explicitly on the record against this free trade agreement, against globalization, against the loss of national sovereignty.
Well, one wonders why Americans should shed their blood for the American flag when this is really what's going on, and yet it seems to be the appeal. On the one hand, the politicians, applaud, and we just had a holiday in which the president, revered the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice that Americans have given for America, for the United States, and yet that's not really what seems to be going on. This move towards a one-world government that is seemingly the Rockefellers and other very powerful, wealthy families that seem to be the power brokers of our system now. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's very much a fair statement. As I said, George Ball and David Rockefeller stated so explicitly before Congress. Now, the hypocrites in Congress and on Wall Street are too clever to say that openly as they did 50 years ago. And you have the appalling hypocrisy of the president and others honoring the sacrifice of people who shed their blood and sacrificed their lives for a flag. But when they get behind closed doors and they get back into their club rooms, they sneer at the idea of nationalities. They say we're a global elite, we are global citizens, we have a globalized economy, and they think, it's those rubes out there who cling to flags and guns and religion, but we're above all that. We know better.
Yeah, we're superior to that. People that believe in God and people that believe in national sovereignty. I mean, we're well beyond that. Of course, when they say we, they mean their ruling elite, a very small number of people.
That's right. That's right. Apparently, they didn't get the memo over in Russia and Ukraine. Those people still very much believe in nationhood.
That is really interesting. That is really interesting. And so what we have here, first it was NAFTA. That was to solidify Canada, Mexico, the United States, and I guess they probably would have liked to have incorporate more of South America if they could have, but the South Americans seem to be somewhat rebellious too, don't they? Some of them.
Yeah, of the Americas.
Yeah, I mean, Argentina hasn't been exactly a willing accomplice to this sort of program, or neither has Brazil. You mentioned the TPP, though, that's going forward. We do have Chile. Mexico, of course, is in the NAFTA. We've got Chile. We got Peru. I think were two South American countries that are part of this deal. I would imagine that this ruling elite would like to incorporate almost everybody if they could. It's under their wings.
Yeah, absolutely. They would like to bring the entire world under this regime. That's why they have the World Trade Organization. But the World Trade Organization hasn't been responsive enough, so now they're trying this other front. They've opened another front in this project to bring all of the nations in the world under one set of rules that empower the globalist corporate state and disempower the people.
Curtis, refresh my memory. I believe a treaty has to be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. Is that right? And is that the process that President Obama is going through?
A treaty does have to be approved by 2/3 of the Senate, but that is not the process Obama is going through with this. Very interesting. It's being submitted as a free trade agreement, not as a treaty, as it should be, as it properly would be. And furthermore, so therefore would only need 51 votes in the Senate. Furthermore, he is pursuing something called fast-track trade promotion authority. He wants Congress to cede to him its constitutional authority to oversee trade with foreign nations, give that power to the president, and under the fast-track legislation, Congress would also cede the cloture vote in the Senate, so that it would not need 60 votes to cut off debate. It would do away with the filibuster on this legislation. It would limit debate and limit the amount of time that Congress could review the agreement. Plus, it would eliminate Congress's ability to amend the agreement that the administration negotiates in any way. They could not change one word. So it's a straight up or down vote, no filibuster, no 60-vote cloture in the Senate, 51 votes to pass in the Senate, 1 vote majority in the House. It's a total abrogation of the Constitution and arrogation of powers by the administration, by the White House.
Just another step towards a dictatorship in America is what we've got here. I mean, how can you say anything other than that? So what's the chances of this thing passing? You got a majority that's Democrats in the Senate, and then you've got, of course, the Vice President there to vote with the president if need be, right? So the chances would seem to be pretty strong that it's passed. No?
Well, it's interesting. There is a bipartisan opposition to this. You have in the Senate, interestingly enough, Harry Reid has said he is not going to bring fast track up. He does not want that voted on. Harry Reid, for all of his flaws, has been opposed to all of these so-called trade agreements.
Oh, good.
He's set against them. Now, he may lose power, though. The Republicans take over. Mitch McConnell is all for this stuff.
Oh, boy.
He's in the bag. On the House side, so the House is really where this is going to be fought out. And there is a bipartisan coalition against it. We have conservative members of the Republican caucus that oppose this on constitutional and sovereignty grounds. And you have a solid majority of the Democratic majority that are opposed to this. So opposed to both fast track and to the trade deal itself. Mm-hmm. So we really have to concentrate on the House, let our members in the House of Representatives know we are opposed to the Fast Track Trade Promotion Authority. We're opposed to this surrender of sovereignty under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's where we're going to stop this thing, and we have a very good shot at doing it.
Oh, well, you're quite active in that effort. I know you are, Curtis, and I want to thank you for that because this is, I think, most egregious. I wasn't aware, so how would the House stop it? If it's well, you're saying it's not a treaty. I mean, he's not treating it as a treaty, so the House would have to pass a law that would negate it, or what?
The House would have to approve it. The House would have to approve the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Oh, okay, since it's not a treaty.
Yeah, that's right. It has to be approved by both houses of Congress.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
So
the fight's going to come down to the House of Representatives.
Okay, give our listeners a little sense of why this is a bad thing. I mean, it always sounds good. All these bills are dressed up to make it sound as if it's all good for us. You know, it's free trade. Well, who's opposed to free trade? It's, free market people like me are always in favor of free trade. But as you said, this hasn't much to do with free trade. If anything, it might make trade less free, perhaps?
That is exactly right. This is not free trade. This is managed trade. This is managed by and for the corporatist elite. The large corporations are going to benefit, rewrite the rules of trade, rewrite the rules of global trade to empower themselves and disempower small businesses and everyone else, the citizens. Mm-hmm. So this is not an exercise in free market economics. This is an exercise in corporatist economics. Mm-hmm. It's going to extend copyright protection for 100 years after the death of the creator. So essentially locking up all creative entities and patents and everything else. You're not going to be able to build on the innovation of the generation before because that'll be locked up and owned by these giant corporations. Wow. Likewise, on the creative side, it will do the same thing to the Internet. The Internet service providers will be turned into Internet police, which will be forced to shut down websites if they get a letter from a lawyer from one of these corporations saying this somehow infringes on a copyright. It's shocking what it will do. It'll shut down information flow, shut down the freedom of the Internet. And as you said earlier, it's a direct assault on national sovereignty. Our Congress will have its hands tied behind its back. Our elected representatives will be forced to conform all of our laws to this international globalist superstate and will not be able to pass any laws that are in contravention of these rules negotiated behind closed doors in utter secrecy by corporate lobbyists. It's and it sets up international tribunals for enforcement. So
Wow.
if you have a problem with one of these laws, one of these rules, or if you're one of the signers of this agreement, and you say, the United States, there's a law in New York State or California which goes against the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, you don't sue in the United States court system. You sue before an international tribunal staffed by corporate lawyers.
That's incredible. So the average person is just basically shut out of the system entirely without any recourse and any ability. I mean, obviously the cost then of going to some international court rather than a local court would be increased as well. I mean, this is the way the large corporatists keep average people from competing, is just to basically to pass laws and so forth to make it more and more expensive for us to compete. You know, you talk about all these different countries. I think you mentioned Singapore, Brunei. Some of these are Islamic states. Some of these, and yet they would have a say as much as America would, presumably, in the makeup of the courts. I mean,
they would have a say in the makeup of courts, and they would have more say than U.S. citizens when it comes to their investments in the U.S. Now, Brunei is a great example. The Islamic Sultanate of Brunei. It's an oil-rich potentate, an oil-rich state, sultanate, in Borneo. It's ruled by one man, the Sultan of Brunei, and you might call him the wild man of Borneo. He just adopted Sharia law in his country. Brunei is now ruled by Sharia law.
Wow.
The Hollywood elite, the Hollywood people are all up in arms because this means they will stone women to death for adultery. They will stone gays to death for homosexuality. They have the Hollywood people haven't talked about this, but at the same time, this is the rule under Sharia law. Christians are not allowed to practice their faith. You can't celebrate Christmas in Brunei. You can't bring Bibles into the country. Missionaries go to jail for spreading the word of Jesus. They go to jail for 5 years. And if you're a Christian parent, you can't have custody of your child if you're married to a Muslim. So it's just disgusting. Now, what happens, the Sultan of Brunei is one of the world's wealthiest men. He owns the Beverly Hills Hotel, and he owns a whole collection of luxury hotels. Yeah. So now if let's say he wants to open a gold mine in Nevada, and he has a lease on public land in Nevada, and he has a problem with some of the Environmental Protection Agency rules in Nevada. Under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, he'll be able to go to one of these international tribunals and sue to have those laws overturned or to be compensated for his loss of profits. Now, if I'm an American and I have a gold mine on public land in Nevada, I have to go to U.S. federal court. I can't go to one of these international corporate law panels. So he has more rights than I do.
That's incredible. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. Well, this is why this is really a bad deal. I mean, there's many reasons why it's a bad deal. I have to ask you, Curtis, before we complete our discussion today, what's going on, though? If I'd like to get your ideas about what's going on in China, it seems to me, I think Obama has talked about the pivot to Asia, and this was part of the policy to pivot American power to Asia. Meantime, we're seeing, the Chinese are. I'm just wondering if they're trying to send a message to Washington to say, well, wait a minute, you think you're coming in here and you're going to take over the South Pacific? Well, we've got different ideas. I mean, they're seemingly picking fights with Japan, which is a signature to this TPP. Also, Vietnam. They recently sunk a ship in Vietnam. There's some conflict with the Philippines, and Obama has recently started to warm up to the Philippines. And interestingly enough, when he made his trip to Asia recently, he didn't visit China at all. He bypassed China, but visited the Philippines and Japan. So it seems to me that their relations are really starting to relations between the United States and China, as they are with Russia, really seem to be getting frigid. And you have to wonder, so do you think, I mean, in many ways, many things that Putin is talking about seem almost more free market capitalist and free than we are now. For example, he's a 13% flat tax. And I would love to have a 13% flat tax in America. I mean, many of the things he's allowing religion to be taught in the schools and encouraging it supposedly in Russia. And so, it's almost as if these countries, and I've always wondered, with this push to globalization by these ruling elite, the Rockefellers and the others that own and control the Federal Reserve, whether how far they could push it. Could they? J.P. Morgan is trying to bribe the Chinese officials by giving their kids great jobs. How far can this ruling elite go when it comes to Asia? Comes to China and Russia. Are we seeing a real? These two countries, really drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Wait a minute, you can't take our countries from us."
That's right. That's exactly what they're saying. They are pursuing nationalist policies. They are pursuing policies which benefit them, their own people, and of course their own national elites or cronies, if you will. Make no mistake, China is a fascist thuggery state. It's the Communist Party of China.
Sure.
Does what enriches itself, and if other people get better off along the way, that's okay.
Yeah.
And Putin, he has been accused of crony capitalism there, but
sure.
It's the national oligarchs and the national elites that are being benefited, that are benefiting from these nationalist policies, whereas the U.S. is pursuing the U.S. government is enthralled to the globalists, and the national elites mean nothing to this country. It's these global elites, and that's the blind spot that the Western elites, the globalists in Washington, have a blind spot to nationalism. They think everybody thinks the way they do, and
right.
As we see, as you pointed out with China and Russia, that is not the case.
Right.
These other countries still very much want to advance their national agendas and maintain their national identities. That's what we saw in the elections in the European Union. And this whole pivot to Asia is just so ridiculous, because what Obama is doing, if we were to pursue this pivot to Asia, is basically we would be making Asia safe for outsourcing, safe for the globalists.
Sure.
There are these ancient rivalries between China and Japan and China and Vietnam. Well, why should the Seventh Fleet or the Sixth Fleet, why should the Sixth Fleet be patrolling the waters of the Western Pacific so that the trade lanes are open? If China and Japan go to war, what's going to happen is it's going to be harder to ship the goods to the Walmarts in America. That might be a good thing for Americans. We're going to start building factories here instead of relying on factories in Asia.
Right.
And the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they now want to move the factories to Vietnam, where the minimum wage is $1 a day. Nike wants to build more factories in Vietnam. So now we're supposed to send the U.S. Navy to intervene between China and Japan so it's safe for Nike to build factories in Vietnam and ship its goods back to the U.S. That's just crazy. If we're worried about China getting too militarily built up and overconfident, let's stop investing in China. How about that?
Yeah. No, how about that? Well, it's all about money, and clearly, I guess they're asking Americans who still believe that they're fighting for America, that they're going to war for the flag and for the things that for our Constitution, when in fact that's not true any longer. That Americans are being asked to die for Nike or for the corporate interest. Well, okay, so I guess maybe that sort of more than anything summarizes why the TPP is a bad thing. It's really pulling the wool over the American people's eyes once again, sort of clandestinely, quietly trying to get this passed so the corporations can continue to bleed the common folks, both domestically and internationally, I suppose.
That's exactly right. And even the supporters of this to speak honestly, which is very rarely, acknowledge that it will have very little effect on economic growth anywhere. We already have free trade agreements with Peru and Chile, with Mexico and China, with Singapore, with Australia. The benefits economically to the average American are negligible at best, and probably nil, and actually would be worse.
Probably negative on the
Yes.
the bottom line if you could measure it. Want to thank you very much, Curtis. I guess what you'd suggest then is that people who are alarmed and concerned about this should definitely contact their congressman, their representatives.
And you can do that by going to AmericanJobsAlliance.com. American Jobs with an S, Alliance.com. There's a big red button there that says Take Action. Press that button. We will connect you directly to your congressman's office, either by telephone, by email, whatever you're comfortable with.
Excellent. That's a great thing. American Jobs, what is it? AmericanJobsAlliance.com.
Correct.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Curtis, for being with us and updating us on the TPP. We'll probably want to have you come back and do the same thing again. Thanks for your good work and your efforts in trying to stop this this evil.
Thank you so much.
Much appreciated.